Okay, so we're going to look at some of the more popular function formulas that are used when it comes to principal and interest type payments and calculations, things like that. So we're going to start out first of all with the monthly payment, this one right here. So as you can see, we have a little table set up here where we have the amount that we want to borrow, our yearly interest rate, how many months we want to take the loan out for, that type of stuff. So in this slot right here, what we'll do is we'll start out with equal PM, and you do PMT or just PM, whatever, but then you can find PMT pop up there, so we double click that. All right. So the first thing it wants to know is the interest rate. So in this case, we're going to click onto that. Now it wants to know it in months, so we're going to take that number, that B4 address there, and divide it by 12, all right? And that will give us our monthly interest. We'll hit the comma, all right? Now the next thing it wants to know is how many months we're going to be taking the loan out for. You can't really see it here because that little help bubble's in the way. I'm going to just kind of move it just a little bit down so you can see that better. In this case, the the amount of months is in this cell, so we click onto that. And then we do another comma. And then we want to go with the principal, which is the $56,000. So it knows those three things: what we want to borrow, for how long, at what rate. That's all it needs to know. Go ahead and hit the enter key, and there it is, 954. Now it shows it as a negative because technically it's money coming from you. In other words, that's a payment you're making. So $954.74. That's pretty cool. Now, what a lot of people don't realize when they take out a loan and they get done paying for it and all that, or even they just take it out, how much actual interest are they paying? I mean, they know they're paying 7%, but they don't really know offhand, or they don't pay attention to it at least, as to how much interest that is. Now, I know usually when you go out and buy a car, they'll give you that, what I think is a truth in lending, and they'll actually show you in there how much in interest you're going to be shelling out. So what this calculation I'm about to show you here is going to do, is going to figure out how much interest would have been paid if you made this payment for the 72 months. In other words, if you paid off the loan, how much interest would you have paid? Now in this case, we're going to use the cumulative interest payment function, okay, and it's abbreviated. So we're going to click onto here. We're going to type in equal and then CUM, and you'll see cumulative payment, the first one there. We'll double click that. And then the first thing it wants to know is your interest rate. So we click on the interest rate there. We divide it by 12 because it wants to know it in months. So we do a comma after that. And then we have to go and tell it how many months. Well, there's your 72. We click on that, comma, and then it wants to know how long or how much the loan is for. We'll do the 56,000 there. Click on that, comma, okay, and then what it needs to know is the start period. Well, we want to start from period 1. All right, so we type in the 1 there, a comma, and then we're going to click on to the B6 again, which is going to be right there, all right, comma, and then 0, and that'll take us to the end. So basically, we want to figure the interest between the beginning and the end, and that's what you have to do. Once you've done that, you can close off the parenthesis if you want to, hit enter, and there you go. So that fine car that you bought, that you thought you got a great deal on at $56,000, ends up costing you a little over $68,000 because you got a little over $12,000 in interest. I mean, that's, that you look at that number, it's like, wow, so that's how much it's costing me. It's kind of hidden when you just look at the monthly payment, but yeah, there it is. That's pretty wild. All right, so that's how that works. Now, the next thing, which is I thought was kind of an interesting formula as well, and I think we've all done this before, where we we might know what we borrowed. We might know the interest rate we borrowed at, and we know the payment that we're making, right? But for the life of us, we can't remember how long we took that loan out for, right? Well, we have a function that will figure that out, given that information we have over here, right? Now, you might be sitting there saying, well, Chip, we know how much it was. It was 72. I'm saying forget about even having that, you know. Just pretend like this is all you have. How are we going to figure out what that number is, right? And we're going to use the NPER, all right, to figure this out. That's the function. So we're going to do equal NP, and you'll see net per or NPER, all right? First thing it wants to know is the interest rate, monthly. So we click onto that, divided by 12, comma. It then wants to know the payment that you're making. There it is, right? Comma, and then a negative, and then you put a negative in there, minus, and then you refer to the principal, which is going to be over at B12 here, right? Remember before how when we do this, we get a negative number here. So we have to put the negative in there to kind of turn into a positive number so that it calculates properly. That's all. All right, so we do that. All right, enter that in. There you go. And there's your 72. So I guess it works. Now back to our original loan that we took out here. I think a lot of you are aware, or at least you've heard this conversation before, where they say at the very beginning of the loan, you're paying more in interest than you are in principal. In other words, most of the money, most of the $954 is going towards interest rather than principal. A lot of people don't really think about that, but what that really means is that you're going to have a very high number here in the very beginning, which will decrease as time goes on. And you're going to have a very low number here, which will increase as time goes on, all right? So it's just kind of interesting to see what those numbers are, all right? So we have a function called IPMT and PPMT, all right? And the IPMT will figure out how much interest on a period over period basis you're paying, and, you know, as you progress, and how much of it is principal as the loan progresses. Pretty cool. So we'll click onto here. We'll type in equal, and then IP, and you'll see IPMT. Okay. Now, first of all, it wants to know what the interest rate is. So we're going to click on to the 7% there. And of course, divide it by 12, comma. Now, it's going to ask now for what period do you want to see the interest for. Now, we want to see it for period 1. In other words, our first payment, how much of it is in interest. Now, we got 72 payments or 72 months. So each of those months is referred to as a period, all right? So in this case, what we need to do is put in the number 1. Now the problem though is if we put the number 1 in there and later on copy the formula down, that 1 will not change to a 2, to a 3, to a 4, to a 5, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to refer to column C or cell address C1, and we're going to use the row function. Now let me just explain this as I type it. I'm going to type in the function RO or row, and I'm going to refer to C1 and then close off the parenthesis. Now what that does is if I did that separately off to the side of the worksheet there and I were to type in equal row and C1 and were to hit the enter key, I would get back the number 1, because what it's basically asking for or doing is it's telling you what row number C1 is. Well, C1 is on row 1. If I were to put in there F2, then what row is F2 on? 2. you see? So if I go with row is C1, that will give me the number 1 for period 1, all right? When I go to copy this down, the C1 will change to C2, and what row is C2 on? The number 2, and so on and so forth. So that's how I'm able to get that number in there, see, and to get it to change as I copy it, right? So we're going to put a comma after that. So that was, in essence, us putting in the number 1, right? And then it needs to know the loan period in months, and that's what we have here. So we'll click onto that and put a comma there. And then it also wants to know the interest rate again, or the interest rate in this case, which will be B3. So, or not interest, I'm sorry, the loan amount. So I can't click onto that, so I'm just going to type in this case, B3, right? So good so far, all right? Now, let me point something out. We're going to be copying this formula down, all right? The reference to B4, which is your interest rate, you don't want that to change to B5, to B6, to B7, to B8. The reference to B6, which is your loan period, how many months, right, is B6. You don't want that to change to B7, B8, B9, B10 as you're copying it down. And the same for B3, which is your loan amount, right? So we need to make B4, B6, and B3 all absolute. Lock them in so they don't change as we copy it down. How do we do that? We click onto the B4, and on our keyboards, we hit the F4 key. That's your absolute shortcut. That will put the dollar symbols on there, keeping that from changing when we copy it down. Okay? Now, if I click on to B6, hit the F4 key, and B3, F4 key, that's it. That's all I got to do. Now enter that in. Oh, and I didn't put my parenthesis in there. All right, so it's saying, do you want me to correct it? Sure, put the parenthesis in for me, hit yes. There it is, right? That's how much interest you're paying, all right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and copy that all the way down. So we'll just do a double click here, all right? As you can see, throughout the length of the loan, as you go further and further towards the end, you end up with $5 in interest on the very last payment. So that's why it's very much of interest, especially if you have a house loan, to get you to refi as often as they can. So, you know, 2 or 3 years pass by, you're paying a lot less in interest and more of your payments going towards your principal. Well, then you say, oh, I want to do my loan over again, get a lower payment, but still a majority of your payment will be going, or a good chunk of it, I should say, will be going towards your interest, okay? So, and so in effect, you're paying a really big interest rate if you refi every year. If you just keep on refi, you're never going to get your principal paid off, and you're going to be paying, well, I mean, it'll come off, but you're going to be paying so much in interest. My God, I mean, so much of your payment is going to go towards interest. Well, anyway, now the only difference between figuring out your interest and figuring out the principal is that we're using the I payment for the interest, and we're using the P payment for the principal. So all we really have to do here is we'll copy the I payment. So I'm just going to select it up there, hit Control C, hit my escape, go to the principal area here, Control V, that'll paste it, right? And then I'll change that from an I to a P, all right? And then we'll go ahead and we'll copy that all the way down, see? So now you can see what's happening. So, you know, almost a third of your payment is going towards principal. That's just how that that calculation works. A lot of the interest is up front, and less of your principal is getting paid off. So like I said before, you get done, you're maybe at payment 30. So I'm going to refi, where a majority of your money was a good chunk of it was going towards principal. So now you say, okay, I'm going to get a cheaper payment, but guess what? Whatever that is, it's still going to be at the beginning of that payment or beginning of that loan period. You're still going to be paying a third of the payment. A third of the payment is going to be going towards interest. So that in effect is putting you in a much higher interest rate, believe it or not. So anyway, the whole purpose of this is just to give you some ideas, and whether or not you're in business, purchasing capital equipment and having to take out payments versus, maybe paying cash, you can kind of see the differences. You can see how much of your hard-earned money is going towards interest. I mean, that's a good thing to see and make some decisions or start some conversations with that. But anyway, so hopefully you enjoyed these functions that we had here, and hopefully you liked the video, and we'll talk to you soon.